So, Owen, you work with a lot of biotechs. What's the biggest problem you see?
Well, nobody knows what's going on. That's probably the biggest no. The biggest, Dale and you and I talk about this a lot. It's really visibility. A lot of the companies that I work for tend to be smaller companies. They come to me because they are startups and they're trying to get in front of customers. And so that's one thing that I do for them is I call the customers, I email the potential customers and I say, hey, do you want to hear about this product, or this product can do X, Y, and Z for you? But that's the sales approach to that problem. And I think when we're talking about a company that nobody knows about, that problem is much more and should be addressed by a marketing solution, not so much a sales solution.
Right, because sales is basically doing it at the retail level, one-on-one,
Exactly.
versus doing it at the wholesale level, one-to-many.
Exactly. It takes a long time to go one-to-one to the entire market and tell them who you are when you don't even know who's in market.
And one of the biggest issues that I've seen for years working with clients is that they are so focused on their product, so focused on how amazing it is, that they manage to convince themselves that as soon as word leaks out that this thing even exists, that it'll go like wildfire and people will be shoving POs under their door at night. And they go and they do a launch, generally a very cold launch, and it's just crickets. And it's crickets for a year and a half before they start to get traction in the market. And so one of the things that I always advise clients, although they seldom do it, is that you need to start active marketing at least 12, maybe 18 months before you're ready to schedule the product launch, because it's going to take a full year of being out there with your message before people even start to recognize that you exist. And this is a challenging thing for people, because the question is always, are we supposed to be spending money marketing something that isn't available to sell? And the answer to that is yes.
Yes, it's a heavy lift, I think, because you have let's say you got your invention and you have your investors lined up and you're R&Ding this into a final product and figuring out the manufacturing. A lot of times there's not wiggle room in that budget for everything that can go wrong. And even if marketing and strategic marketing and brand positioning is part of your pre-launch plan, that is usually the first thing that goes if something happens to your manufacturability and you need to solve that problem. That's much more tangible and concrete, whereas marketing and nobody knows about it, that's a problem for post-launch. That's
Right. But the analogy I always make is that every single movie that's ever been released, they did almost all the marketing before you could buy the product. Because the alternative is the movie opens to completely empty theaters for the first 2 weeks until enough people see it that you start to get word of mouth. And this exact same thing happens in biotech, where you have a great product, you've told nobody about it until it's ready to buy, and you're literally opening to empty theaters.
Well, there's another reason for that too that creeps in, which is that companies, and I say startup, life science product, research product companies that I'm most familiar with, are concerned that they're going to reveal their position to their competitors and get beat to the punch, right? I don't give a lot of credence to this. I think it's actually more valuable if you're signaling to the market, hey, we are about to develop this specialized niche tool. That's, I think, more of a deterrent for competitors to actually stay away from that. But is there a competitive consideration that you have to make if you're marketing your product before it's out there?
I think the last thing you should worry about are your competitors, because they're already on their own sort of tunnel vision plan. What you do is probably not going to change what they do.
Right.
And,
Plus, your competitors probably don't know you exist either.
but one of the things, and I've had this exact question come up multiple times, and one of the things I will always do is I'll go and do a bit of research on their competitors about something the competitor's doing that's a potential differentiation or a potential advantage over what the client is doing. And I'll say, company X is going to be doing this. Is this enough information for you to re-engineer your product to match it? And the answer is always no, because they always have a good reason for why they're taking that approach, the approach that they've already settled on and that they're already taking. And so the deal is, knowing what a competitor is going to do almost never alters anything whatsoever about what you're going to do. The only advantage is to use that information to get out ahead of the competitor, because every choice that a company makes about their product has advantages and disadvantages. If you can start, poking your competitor with a sharp stick early on around why your choice is a clear advantage over not having your choice, knowing that your competitor is taking a different path, this becomes a very good tool to use. But again, the idea is you want to get out there early and you want people to start to know you exist. And going back to the question about marketing before you have something to sell, the other thing to keep in mind is that at any given point in time, only 3 to 5% of your market is prepared to buy, which means that even if your product has launched 5 years ago, that the largest part of your market that you're trying to communicate to are not buying anyway, because they don't have a need right now. And just because they don't have a need right now doesn't mean that you should not be marketing to them. And again, one of the mistakes I see is a lot of focus on what's referred to as performance marketing, which is essentially, marketing to get active leads of people who are ready to buy right now, which is that 3 to 5% of your market, and basically ignoring the brand awareness marketing that's needed to let people know that you exist so that you're in their mind when the need arises, and that you then become part of the consideration set when they're getting ready to make a purchase choice.
Yeah. So that's everybody wants to be in the consideration set, I think. Performance marketing obviously is very popular and trendy because you can attribute specific leads to specific sources and then dial your investment into whatever is going to give you the most leads, supposedly. Brand marketing, I think, again, it's one of those heavier lifts where if I have, let's say, a marketing budget of $50,000 for a year, which might be typical for a small company, do I spend that on brand marketing or do I spend that on Google ads? Because with the Google ads, I can kind of see what I'm getting back. But with brand marketing, it's going into a hole of maybe content production, maybe events, maybe sponsorships. Like, how can I justify that to an investor?
And the cadence that I've always recommended is you do pretty much pure brand marketing in that 12 months before launch. And then you shift to very heavy performance marketing in the 12 months after launch. Because after launch, you're actively trying to fill the sales pipeline. You're actively looking for people that are right now ready to buy. That doesn't mean that you take the brand marketing to zero, but certainly once you've got a product ready to sell, that initial focus needs to be on generating active leads of current buyers. But then, at some point, and that point is usually within the first year, you're going to start to hit a plateau where you're starting to see less effectiveness. Those leads in the early days were closing at a 20% rate. Now they're closing at a 2% rate. And so you're going to see this fall off in effectiveness. And that's when, you need to then rebalance the budget to something that's probably about 50-50 between brand awareness, which is talking to people who are not yet in market, but will be, versus performance marketing, which are talking to the 5% who are ready to buy right now. And because the critical thing, as you said, was that you need to be in that consideration set. You need to be those one of 2 or 3 products that they're looking at that they're going to make a buying choice with. And basically the number one rule for getting in the consideration set is that they know you exist.
Yeah. So I have actually had to defend against products that were not yet released. So I was working for Ventana at the time. We had a very good auto stainer. There's a competitor called Daco, and they had been on the space for as long as Ventana had, and they kept teasing their new product release. And I would go out to customers that wanted my Ventana stainer, and they would say, "Oh, we're going to wait until Daco launches their machine before we make a decision on whether to purchase you or not." And I'm like, this is crazy. And from where I was sitting, I was like, these guys are clearly teasing it so they can make it harder for Ventana to perform in the market. And I don't think they ever actually even launched that product. Right. But so that was a brand that was already in the space and was already aware, and they were just leveraging that awareness to fend off competitors. But what if I'm a startup company and my brand is literally like a blank slate? Like, I have a product in R&D, and I have a couple PhD founders in the company and maybe like an operations guy or something. Like, how do I start to message about my brand? Is it Do I lead with my values and, hey, we started this company because we wanted to make a change in this space? Or do I leverage personal brand, like the reputation of the founders and that sort of thing? Like how do I start to compose the basics of that messaging?
Yeah. The challenge that you've got during those early stages is that, and again, it's whether you're just launching a product and nobody knows you exist, or you've been around for a few years, but 95% of your market at any given time isn't ready to buy. They don't have a need right now. They'll have a need in the future. And so the bulk of your marketing is going to fall on the ears of people who are not prepared to buy today. And there's a very fundamental difference, especially with a highly technical product, between someone ready to buy right now and someone that will clearly have a need in the future but isn't in market. And this has to do with their attention. That if you're looking at the product details of 3 different digital PCR platforms, you're going to be doing a lot of deep diving into a lot of technical information. If you don't need a digital PCR platform today, you're not going to be wasting your time diving into this unless that's your hobby. And so what happens is that we've got a very narrow amount of attention. And a good rule of thumb is you have between 3.5 and 5 seconds of attention for someone who is not actively in market, which means that, and basically whatever you want to stuff into their head, you can stuff as much information as you would like, so long as you can say it in under 5 seconds. So that generally means that you want to connect your key branding elements, meaning name, logo, any tagline, with your product category. And then hopefully with some sort of differentiation. We're brand X, we have a digital PCR platform with AI analysis. So you're connecting the brand or the key branding elements. So company name, if you're early on, company name and product name should probably be the same. Whatever sort of visual elements you've got, what category you're in, and then 1 point of why somebody should care. And you can say that in 3.5 to 5 seconds, and you can actually get that implanted in people's memory. You start going into your LOD tables and the results of your clinical trials and everything else, and people's eyes are going to completely glaze over and they're going to move on. And the deal is nothing will be retained. And this is the real difference between the brand marketing and the performance marketing, is that the brand marketing is, what can I say in under 5 seconds? The performance marketing is, here are all the details of why you should buy. Right. And these are very different conversations.
So when I hear you make that description, the tactic that comes to mind for me is facilitation, right? And so people are probably more familiar with a sub-tactic of facilitation called sponsorship, which is very expensive, right? So that's where you're sponsoring like the lanyard at a trade show and you're like, hey, XYZ consumables, we make science better or faster or whatever the tagline is. But for a small company, the $10,000 lanyard sponsorship isn't really a great choice. So right. Like under the umbrella facilitation, to me, that includes more guerrilla tactics. If you are setting up a live stream or a webinar and you're just bringing in a couple of experts that are expert in the problem or the category that you are playing in, you give an introduction, there's your 5 to 10 seconds of intro, and then you basically let the event play out between the experts who are going to discuss the category, and your brand then has a favorable association with right. that category.
And the thing to keep in mind is that 100% of content marketing, and what you were just describing is sort of classic content marketing, a webinar, a live stream, a long form paper, a podcast. These are classic video, a YouTube channel. These are all classic content marketing. 100% of content marketing falls into 2 classes. You have category awareness and you have sales enablement. If your video is doing a detailed walkthrough of how to use your new library prep kit, that's sales enablement. That's something that is for a buyer who's in market, who's trying to understand how you're different than their other alternative options. But everything else is basically category awareness, not product or brand awareness. And for instance, these LinkedIn Lives that we're doing, Owen runs a business as an independent sales rep for biotechs. I work as a strategic marketing consultant to biotechs. Neither one of us have ever talked about what we do. What we're talking about are general problems that are within the category of what we solve, which is different than how we solve it for you at a detail level. And Again, a lot of what you can do in terms of this kind of brand awareness, both pre-launch and post-launch, is really category awareness. Because a lot of people that are going back to the digital PCR platform, a lot of people are buying one for the first time, which means that they don't have direct hands-on experience of how to evaluate the platforms. If you can present them with the sort of expertise or the sort of knowledge that will help them make those sort of distinctions between alternative platforms, and you do it in such a way that it aligns with your worldview, because your product was designed with a particular worldview. It was designed with a particular view toward how you think this problem should be solved, that is different than how other people think the same problem should be solved. And so that sort of long form content marketing that basically establishes why that worldview is the correct worldview is going to directly drive them to your product when they're ready to buy.
So, I mean, content marketing can be a great strategy for those small startups that have usually usually their time budget is greater than their dollar budget. And so you can access it at any level of resources, right? So I think that's really good. A lot of in life science, at least on the research side, I guess also on the clinical side, we have this idea of early adopters or beta customers. And this is a question that Kelly brought up. Does having beta customers play into, is that going to help you solve the problem of nobody knows we exist? Can we leverage that to our advantage there?
Depends on how many people they know and are willing to talk to.
Yeah.
Which is usually about 10.
Right. So I see it play out sort of two ways. So one way is, hey, if you're exploring the category and you're creating content and you're talking to people, you can say, hey, Harvard is beta testing this, or you drop some fancy name that everybody knows. And that kind of lets you bolt some more credibility onto your own brand. But the flip side of that coin is usually if it's an academic customer, which is often the beta customer. If it's a pharma customer, they don't want anything said about it, and they don't want you to say anything about it. And there's probably a written agreement to that effect. If it's an academic customer, then they're thinking about, oh, we don't really want to say anything substantive about this until we can publish, which is going to be another 12 months after you actually launch the product. So I in some ways it can't hurt if you have the bandwidth to do it, I think, but in others, I don't know that it moves the ball down the field very far in terms of brand awareness. You summarized it pretty quickly. It was about 10 people. That might be your mind for brand awareness that you get out of that.
And here's the deal, is that beta tester, is that beta customer, if they like the product, there's a small group of colleagues that they'll mention it to. But the deal is you need to take those stories and be the megaphone. And this is part of what needs to be done during this kind of pre-launch, early post-launch period, is the value of the beta customers, besides shaking out the product. And again, I can't imagine somebody launching a product without having beta customers. I think that's just insanely risky. The value of the beta customers is it's an enormously powerful source of stories. How, especially if the product did something unexpected. Were you able to solve a problem that no one was expecting you to solve? Were you able to accomplish something that went beyond what you would normally have expected? These are the sort of stories that you can then pull back into the marketing effort and amplify through things like the content marketing. And so I think that's where the real value of the beta customers is the source of stories that go back into, because again, your product has a worldview. You've got a particular view of the world around why you're solving this problem the way you're solving it. And you need to bake that worldview into the minds of the people that are going to be future potential buyers, so that when they are evaluating products, the feature differences are not agnostic. The feature difference, certain features are going to be much more valuable than other features if you're coming at it with a different worldview. And again, being able to exemplify that worldview in the things that happen with your beta customers becomes a very early source of very powerful stories that you can use. One of the things that you see a lot of are key opinion leaders, KOLs. And KOLs have very limited usage. I mean, for the most part, certainly early on, they tend to not be very useful in terms of getting the product sold, to be honest. Later on, they might be useful in the same way that Kim Kardashian is useful with her TikTok channel selling cosmetics. They can help amplify messages once you're out there because they're voices that people will listen to. But the problem with most KOLs is that they don't actually want to say anything out loud. They just want to be paid to fly in for their scientific advisory board meeting every 6 months.
I am available for KOL opportunities. I just want to put that out there.
For the right price.
For the right price. Yeah.
I have seen so many gold-plated KOLs on so many scientific advisory boards produce so little impact. And they are basically ornamentation. And they're primarily ornamentation for investors, not for your sales and marketing effort, not for your customers. You have so-and-so from Harvard with a Nobel Prize on your SAB, and that will translate into X number of millions of additional investment dollars. Will not translate into additional sales dollars as a rule.
Yeah. We should probably tackle that in a follow-up live stream, because
Yeah.
I think there's probably a lot of use and misuse of KOLs and beta programs and academic collaborations that we could dive into. Yeah. Any final thoughts on the number one problem?
No, just recognize that even though everyone you know knows what you're doing, doesn't mean that's a very big circle. You have to step back and recognize that almost no one knows you exist, and it takes a very long time to change that. And until you're able to achieve some minimum level of at least recognition, it's going to be very hard to really start to get the kind of traction in the market and the kind of revenue and sales growth that you're going to need to be able to survive and turn the company into a sustaining business.
Good place to end it.